The nursery was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight, casting long shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers across the walls. 6-month-old Emily lay motionless in her crib, her tiny body paralyzed from birth, her breaths so quiet they barely stirred the air. The doctors had called it a rare neurological disorder, one that left her trapped in her own body, aware but unable to move, to cry, to reach out. Her parents, Sarah and David, had spent months in a haze of grief and desperate hope, clinging to the idea that one day, somehow, their little girl might defy the odds. And then there was Max. The golden retriever puppy had been a gift from David's brother, a distraction, he'd said, something to bring a little joy into the house. No one expected what happened next. From the moment they brought Emily home, Max refused to leave her side. He would curl up at the foot of her crib, his warm body pressed against her tiny feet, his dark, soulful eyes watching over her as if he understood. As if he knew she needed him. That night, everything changed. Sarah had tucked Emily in as usual, brushing a kiss over her forehead before stepping out, leaving the door slightly ajar. The baby monitor hummed softly on the nightstand, its green light flickering in the dark. Down the hall, Sarah and David sat in exhausted silence, the TV murmuring some late-night show they weren't really watching. Then, Max growled. It wasn't his usual playful grumble or the warning bark he gave when the mailman came too close. This was deeper, primal, a sound that raised the hairs on Sarah's arms before she even registered what she was hearing. David frowned. What's gotten into him? Before Sarah could answer, the baby monitor crackled. A whisper slithered through the static. She's mine now. Sarah's blood turned to ice. David was on his feet in an instant, his chair scraping back as he bolted for the nursery. Sarah followed, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The nursery door was closed. They had left it open. David shoved it open, and the scene before them froze them in place. Max was standing rigid in the center of the room, his fur bristling, his teeth bared in a snarl. His body was tense, his paws planted firmly as if bracing against some unseen force. The air was thick, heavy, wrong. The nightlight flickered, the shadows stretching and twisting like living things. And Emily. Emily's eyes were wide open. Not drowsy, not drifting toward sleep. Alert. Terrified. Her tiny fingers twitched. Sarah gasped. Emily hadn't moved on her own since birth. Then, the crib rattled. Not from Emily. Not from Max. From something beneath it. A low, guttural chuckle echoed through the room, though no mouth moved to make it. The temperature plummeted, their breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. Frost spiraled across the window panes, jagged and claw-like. Max lunged. He didn't bark. Didn't make a sound. Just threw himself at the empty space beside the crib, his jaws snapping shut on nothing, no, not nothing. Because something snarled back. A shadow, blacker than the darkest night, writhed where Max's teeth had closed. It twisted, hissing, recoiling like a wounded animal. The puppy didn't let go. He shook his head violently, his growls reverberating through the room as the shadow thrashed, its edges fraying like smoke caught in the wind. Then, silence. The shadow dissolved. The cold lifted. And Emily let out a soft, shuddering breath, her fingers curling weakly into Max's fur. Sarah sobbed, rushing forward to scoop her daughter into her arms. David dropped to his knees beside Max, running his hands over the trembling puppy, checking for injuries. There were none. But the nursery floor was scratched to hell. Deep, jagged grooves ran in frantic arcs around the crib, as though something with claws had circled it, over and over, trying to get in. Max had stopped it. Somehow, impossibly, he had stopped it. Sarah clutched Emily tighter, her tears falling onto the baby's blanket. "Did you see that?" she whispered. David's face was pale. "Yeah." They both looked at Max. The puppy, exhausted, slumped onto the floor, his sides heaving. But his eyes never left Emily. And in the dim light, for just a second, they glowed. The next morning, Sarah called the pediatrician in a frenzy, babbling about Emily moving her fingers, about some kind of seizure, about the scratches on the floor. The doctor listened patiently, then gently suggested she might be exhausted. Stressed. Seeing things. But the scratches were real. David examined them in the daylight, running his fingers over the gouges in the hardwood. They weren't random. They formed symbols, crude, jagged, but deliberate. Circles within circles. A twisted mimicry of protection runes. Had Max done this? No. No, these were made by something far larger. Far sharper. That night, they moved Emily's crib into their bedroom. Max stayed glued to her side, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a quiet, watchful intensity. He no longer wagged his tail at treats or toys. His entire world had narrowed to one thing, Emily. 3 nights passed without incident. On the 4th, the whispering returned. Sarah heard it first, drifting through the baby monitor like a stray radio signal. You can't keep her. She shot upright, her pulse roaring in her ears. David was already awake, his hand gripping hers so tight it hurt. Max was growling again. But this time, Emily was crying. Not the soft, fussy whimpers of a sleepy baby. This was a scream, raw, terrified, the kind of sound no infant should be able to make. Sarah and David sprinted to the nursery, because they had moved the crib back. Why had they moved it back, throwing the door open just in time to see the shadow? It wasn't lurking. Wasn't hiding. It was leaning over Emily. Tall. Gaunt. A silhouette of a man with 2 long limbs, its fingers, too many fingers, brushing against Emily's forehead. Max launched himself at it with a snarl that shook the walls. The shadow turned its head. And smiled. Then the lights went out. Sarah screamed. David shouted. Emily's cries cut off abruptly. When the lights flickered back on, Max was standing over Emily, his body rigid, his muzzle dripping with something black and viscous. The shadow was gone. But on the wall above the crib, written in something dark and wet, were 2 words. Mine soon. The words on the wall dripped like fresh ink, the substance too thick to be blood, too dark to be anything natural. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers hovering just above the grotesque message. Don't touch it, David warned, his voice low and strained. Max stood between them and the crib, his golden fur bristling, his lips curled back in a silent snarl. His eyes, usually warm and trusting, were sharp, calculating, as if he were waiting for the next attack. Emily lay perfectly still, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Her tiny fingers twitched again, but this time, Sarah didn't celebrate the movement. This wasn't a miracle. It was a warning. David spent the next morning digging through town records, his coffee gone cold and forgotten. The house wasn't old, built in the 80s, but the land it stood on had a history. A dark one. Before the development, the area had been known as Black Hollow. Locals whispered about disappearances, about strange lights in the woods, about a family who had lived there in the early 1900s. The Millers. Their youngest child, a baby girl named Lillian, had died in her crib. Suffocation, the records claimed. But the coroner's notes told a different story. No signs of struggle. No evidence of smothering. The child simply stopped breathing. And the father, Samuel Miller, had gone mad shortly after. He was found in the woods, his fingers clawed bloody, his lips moving in a silent chant. The last words he spoke before they locked him away. It's coming back. Max hadn't eaten since the night before. He refused treats, ignored his favorite squeaky toy, and paced the house like a soldier on guard duty. Sarah watched him from the kitchen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "He's not acting like a dog," she murmured. David glanced up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she hesitated. "He watches things. Things that aren't there." As if on cue, Max's head snapped toward the hallway. His ears pricked, his body tensing. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Sarah followed his gaze. The hallway was empty. But for a single, heart-stopping second, the air shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt, and the faintest outline of a hand pressed against the wall. Then it was gone. Max let out a sharp, warning bark. That night, Sarah woke to the sound of scratching. Not the soft skitter of mice in the walls. This was deliberate. Hungry. Scritch. 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 Like claws dragging down the bedroom door. She sat up, her breath catching in her throat. David was already awake, his face pale in the moonlight. Max was gone. The scratching stopped. Then. A whimper. Not human. Max. Sarah and David bolted from the bed, throwing the door open just in time to see the shadow holding Max. Not just looming over him. Holding him. Its elongated fingers wrapped around the puppy's body, squeezing until Max's whimpers turned into choked, pained yelps. "No!" Sarah screamed. The shadow's head snapped toward her. And then. Emily cried. A sharp, piercing wail from the nursery. The shadow dropped Max. The puppy hit the ground with a thud, his body limp. The shadow moved, streaking toward the nursery faster than anything should be able to move. David lunged, throwing himself between the shadow and Emily's door. The shadow didn't stop. It went through him. David gasped, his body seizing as the darkness passed into him, his veins turning black beneath his skin for one horrifying second before the shadow emerged on the other side. Then it was in the nursery. Sarah ran, her heart pounding, her vision blurring with tears. She reached the door just in time to see the shadow leaning over Emily's crib. And Max. Somehow, impossibly, Max was already there. The puppy stood on shaky legs, his body battered, his fur matted with something dark. But his teeth were bared, his growl deep and resonant, like the voice of something far older than a dog. The shadow hesitated. Then Max spoke. Not a bark. Not a whine. A word. No. The shadow recoiled. And for the first time, it looked afraid. The next morning, David found something in the attic. A box, hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside, yellowed newspaper clippings, a rusted locket, and a single, crumbling page from a diary. Samuel Miller's diary. I called to the dark to bring her back. It answered. But it wants another. A trade. A life for a life. Sarah's hands shook as she read the next line. It will come for the next child. Unless the guardian stops it. David looked at Max, who sat at the foot of Emily's crib, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. What are you? David whispered. Max didn't answer. But outside, the wind howled like a thing in pain. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, Samuel Miller's diary spread before her, the brittle pages threatening to crumble at her touch. The words swam in her vision as she read the same line over and over. The guardian is not of this world. It wears the skin of a beast, but its soul is older than the trees. David paced behind her, running a hand through his disheveled hair. This doesn't make sense. Are we supposed to believe Max is some kind of supernatural protector? As if summoned, Max padded into the room, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood. He stopped beside Sarah's chair and rested his head on her knee. His golden eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she noticed the faintest ring of silver around his pupils, like moonlight caught in a dark pool. A shiver ran down her spine. From the nursery, Emily let out a soft coo. The sound should have been comforting. But Sarah's blood turned to ice. Because Emily never made noise when she was alone. Sarah moved first, nearly knocking over her chair in her haste. David was right behind her, his breath hot on her neck as they rushed down the hall. The nursery door stood slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness pulsed beyond it. Sarah's hand trembled as she pushed the door open. Emily lay in her crib, her tiny fingers curled around the bars, her body upright in a way that should have been impossible for a paralyzed infant. Her head turned toward them. Too slow. Too deliberate. And then she smiled. "You found the diary." The voice that came from Emily's mouth was layered, a child's tone twisted with something guttural, ancient. David staggered back. "What the hell?" Samuel called to the dark, Emily continued, her lips moving out of sync with the words. But the dark answers only to itself. Max let out a warning growl, his body tense to spring. Emily's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "The puppy can't stop what's coming. He's just a vessel." Sarah's knees threatened to give out. "What do you want?" Emily's smile widened. "What was promised?" Then her body went limp, collapsing back into the crib like a marionette with its strings cut. Max lunged forward, planting himself between the crib and Sarah, his teeth bared at the empty air. But the room felt heavier. Darker. As if something had just left. That night, Sarah dreamed of the woods. Black hollow stretched before her, the trees gnarled and weeping sap like blood. At the center stood a massive oak, its trunk split open like a wound. And curled at its base, a wolf. No. Not a wolf. Its fur was gold. Its eyes were human. Max. But not the Max she knew. This creature was larger, its body rippling with something beneath the skin, something that moved independently, like shadows given form. "Guardian," a voice hissed from the trees. Sarah turned. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, tall, emaciated, its limbs too long, its face a smooth void where features should have been. "You stole it from me," the figure rasped. "The child was mine. A life for a life." The golden wolf rose, its lips peeling back in a snarl. Samuel's debt was paid, it said, and Sarah realized with a start that the voice was Max's, but deeper, older. "You take no more." The figure lunged. Sarah woke with a gasp, her nails digging into the mattress. Next to her, David slept fitfully. And at the foot of the bed, Max sat watching her, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The next morning, Sarah drove to the local historical society. The librarian, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, recognized the Miller name immediately. "Ah," she said, pulling a dusty ledger from the shelves. "You live in the old Miller place." Sarah's throat tightened. "What happened to them?" The woman's smile faded. "Samuel Miller's daughter died in her crib. Stillborn, they said. But Samuel claimed something took her." She lowered her voice. "He went mad trying to get her back. Made bargains no man should make." Sarah's hands shook. "What kind of bargains?" The librarian hesitated. Then she flipped the ledger open to a marked page. A faded sketch stared back at Sarah, a twisted, shadowed figure standing over a crib. And beneath it, a single word. Belphegor. That night, the temperature in the house dropped so suddenly that Sarah could see her breath. David clutched Emily to his chest, his face ashen. Max stood at the foot of the stairs, his body rigid, his growl a continuous, rolling thunder. The front door creaked open on its own. And there, silhouetted against the moonlight, stood the figure from Sarah's dream. Tall. Hollow. Hungry. "Give her to me," it whispered, its voice like dry leaves scraping against stone. Max stepped forward, his golden fur bristling. "No. The figure's head tilted. You are bound to the earth, guardian. You cannot stop me. Max's body began to change. His limbs elongated. His fur darkened. His eyes burned like twin suns. I am bound, he snarled, his voice no longer that of a dog, but of something older. But so are you. The shadow hesitated. Then it attacked. The air crackled with energy as Max's transformation completed. No longer a golden retriever puppy, he stood nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, his massive form rippling with barely contained power. His fur had darkened to the color of burnt amber, and his eyes glowed with an unearthly golden light that cast long shadows across the foyer. Sarah clutched Emily tighter as the shadowy figure, Belphegor, took a step forward. The floorboards groaned beneath its weight, though it seemed to float just above them. You cannot win, guardian, Belphegor hissed, its voice like nails on slate. The bargain was made in blood. The child is mine. Max bared teeth that had grown too long, too sharp. Samuel Miller's bargain died with him. A cruel laugh echoed through the house. Foolish beast. Bargains with the dark do not die. They wait. With terrifying speed, Belphegor lunged. The two forces collided in a whirlwind of snarling shadows and golden light. Max's jaws clamped down on Belphegor's arm, and the entity screamed, a sound that shattered the windows and sent cracks racing up the walls. David grabbed Sarah and pulled her back as black ichor sprayed from the wound, sizzling where it touched the floor. The liquid moved on its own, slithering toward Emily like a living thing. Max wrenched his head sideways, tearing Belphegor's arm clean off. The severed limb dissolved into smoke before it hit the ground. But Belphegor only laughed. Strike me down, guardian. It changes nothing. The shadows in the room deepened. The walls breathed. And then Emily began to float. Her tiny body lifted from Sarah's arms, hovering in midair as an inky darkness seeped from her pores. No! Sarah screamed, reaching for her daughter. But it was too late. Belphegor's voice came from Emily's mouth now. She was never yours. Max staggered back, his massive form flickering between dog and something far more ancient. His glowing eyes locked onto Emily, no, onto the thing wearing Emily's skin. You lied, Max growled. This was never about Samuel's debt. Emily's head tilted at an impossible angle. The child was born empty. A perfect vessel. Sarah's blood ran cold. What does that mean? Max turned his head just enough to meet her gaze. Emily's paralysis, it wasn't an illness. Her soul was never fully there. Belphegor has been waiting to claim her since birth. David's voice broke. Then our real daughter. Gone, Belphegor crooned through Emily's lips. Before she ever drew breath. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All those months of hope, of love, had they been caring for a hollow shell? But then. A whimper. Faint. Weak. But undeniably Emily's. It came from the hallway. Sarah turned to see a faint, shimmering outline of a baby girl crawling toward them, a ghostly echo of the child they'd raised. There Emily. Max's ears pricked. The fragment. Belphegor snarled. A insignificant piece. She is still mine. But the ghostly Emily reached toward her physical body, her tiny fingers stretching. And Max moved. With a roar that shook the foundations of the house, Max launched himself at Belphegor-possessed Emily. But instead of attacking, he wrapped his massive form around her, his golden light flaring brighter than ever. Belphegor screamed as the light burned through the darkness. You cannot have her, Max growled. Not while I still stand. Sarah watched in horror and awe as Max's body began to dissolve, his fur turning to motes of golden light that swirled around Emily. He wasn't fighting Belphegor. He was merging with Emily. The ghostly fragment of their daughter surged forward, drawn into the maelstrom of light and shadow. For one terrible, beautiful moment. The room went white. When the light faded, Emily lay on the floor, whole, unharmed, and moving. Her tiny fingers flexed. Her legs kicked. And when she opened her eyes, they glowed faintly gold. Belphegor was gone. So was Max. But as Sarah scooped her daughter into her arms, she felt it, a warmth, a presence. And in the back of her mind, a familiar voice. Always watching. 1 year later, sunlight streamed through the windows of their new home, a cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, far from the shadows of Black Hollow. Emily sat on a blanket in the grass, giggling as she stacked colorful blocks with chubby, perfectly mobile fingers. Sarah watched from the porch, her heart swelling as David knelt beside their daughter, helping her steady a wobbling tower. Normal. Happy. Whole. But not entirely ordinary. Because sometimes, when the light hit Emily's eyes just right, they still gleamed with a faint golden hue. And sometimes, when Sarah tucked her in at night, Emily would whisper things. Max says goodnight. Max says don't be scared of the dark. Max says he loves us. At first, it had unsettled them. But as the months passed, they realized the truth. Max wasn't gone. He had become part of her. On Emily's second birthday, as Sarah blew out the candles on a lopsided homemade cake, Emily suddenly clapped her hands and squealed. Look! Puppy! Sarah and David turned. There, in the sun-dappled grass, a familiar golden shadow flickered, just for a second. The silhouette of a dog, tail wagging, before dissolving into the light. Emily reached out, her tiny fingers passing through the air where it had been. Bye-bye, Max, she whispered. And then she hugged something they couldn't see. Something warm. Something good. That night, Sarah dreamed of a sunlit meadow. Max sat at the center, his fur golden, his eyes kind. No longer a guardian. No longer bound. Just Max. Thank you, Sarah whispered in the dream. Max tilted his head, his tail thumping once. And then he turned, trotting toward the horizon where a soft, golden light awaited. Not gone. Just home. Years later, when Emily started school, her teacher asked the class to draw their families. Most children drew parents, siblings, pets. Emily drew 4 figures. Mom. Dad. Herself. And a golden dog, sitting proudly at her side. When the teacher asked who it was, Emily simply smiled. My guardian. And somewhere, in the warmth of the sun or the rustle of the wind, a loyal heart still beat. Watching. Protecting. Loving. Always. The end.